Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Unwrap Africa on SABC News, where we aim to bring you up to speed with all the latest news from across the continent this week. I'm Thembekile Mkhototo Siaqhaqha. On the show tonight, former South African President Thabo Mbeki delivers a thought-provoking memorial lecture on King Moshoeshoe. We'll also unpack the election results from Uganda with Africa analyst Nixon Katembo and People Power Coordinator in South Africa, Richard Kamya. And our question this evening is linked to one of our top stories, the situation in Uganda, where earlier this week authorities are said to have instructed telecoms providers to impose an internet blackout. What do you make of that move that appears to be increasingly common among African countries, especially going into elections? You can find us on Facebook, X, and on TikTok, Unwrap_Africa. We'll have a look at your feedback later in the program. Let's have a look now at all the top stories from the continent this week. 6 people have been killed in clashes between the Chadian army and the MPRD rebel group. Fighting erupted on Tuesday morning in the Kabul area, leaving 3 soldiers dead and 10 wounded.
We reject whatever is being declared by Mr. Kamya, because those so-called results that they're declaring are fake.
Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine says security forces have raided his home, placed his family under house arrest and forced him into hiding. He's rejected the results of the election this week, alleging fraud as well as violence against demonstrators. The United States says it's delivered what it calls critical military supplies to Nigeria. It comes after the US carried out strikes on Christmas Day, targeting what it said were militants in Nigeria's unstable northwest. The delivery is the latest sign of strengthening cooperation between Washington and Abuja. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud says that his government has cancelled all agreements with the United Arab Emirates, accusing the Gulf state of failing to respect Somalia's sovereignty and unity.
Right-footed efforts from the Atalanta man. Nigeria have won the bronze medals at the Africa Cup of Nations. Penalty success after
News from the AFCON tournament now. Nigeria have secured a bronze medal at this year's African Cup of Nations after defeating Egypt on penalties. Meanwhile, host Morocco will play Senegal shortly in a much-anticipated final. Former South African President Thabo Mbeki has delivered a thought-provoking memorial lecture on King Moshoeshoe II, marking 30 years since the death of the King of Lesotho in a car accident. Mbeki highlighted a pivotal role that was played by the late king in efforts to defend his territorial independence and in the establishment of the African Native National Conference.
Former President Mbeki was invited by Lesotho's royal family to deliver the late King Moshoeshoe II's memorial lecture. But as protocol would demand, a courtesy call to the royal palace is observed. Meanwhile, the Mantabisen Convention Center is packed to the rafters, and all eyes are on the former president to deliver the memorial lecture. Mbeki then digs deep in clarifying King Moshoeshoe's role in the formation of Africa's oldest liberation movement, now known as the African National Congress.
And he said that the highest position in Congress, therefore, is that of the leader of the nobles. This great person is Letsie II, the paramount chief of Lesotho land. This position was clearly understood and accepted by the delegates at the whole Congress in Bloemfontein. It was unanimity of the sentiment and devotion which made election unnecessary. This was a position which Chief Mahama, as a representative of Letsie II, occupied throughout Congress without any question. Chief Mahama finally controlled not only the acting president, but the whole Congress. This is sufficient proof of the fact that Letsie II, whom he representative is the real head of the South African Native National Congress by the unanimous consent of the whole Congress and of the noble chiefs who rendered notable assistance. Thus, it is true that Letsie II is now not the paramount chief of Basotho land only, but is through this Congress a national prince over all of the natives of Southern Africa who came under the Congress.
Mbeki further says that Moshoeshoe II continued from the legacy of Basotho's royal family, initiated by King Moshoeshoe I, to serve in the struggle to liberate African people.
And this was exactly why His Majesty King Letsie II played such a prominent role in the establishment of the African National Congress, then representing Africans from as far away as the present-day Zambia. In an address on the 16th of December 1971, to mark the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the real African Mkhonto Sizwe, not this other one, then President of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, said, "Let us arm ourselves with the willpower and fearlessness of Shaka, the endurance and vision of Moshoeshoe, the courage and resourcefulness of Sekhukhune, the tenacity and valor of Insa, and all founding fathers of the African National Congress. Let the dream of Moshoeshoe, who cherished a great alliance of African people to resist their separate conquest, to come true in our lifetime." And he said, "Let us fight for freedom. The white enemy, the white wolf in South Africa can and must be defeated."
The annual wreath-laying ceremonies concluded by traditional celebrations, traditional dances, and food is the order of the day as Basotho's great leaders are celebrated. I'm Rapelang Khatebe for SABC News, Masero, Lesotho.
Well, in Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni has been declared the winner of the latest presidential election in the country, extending his rule into another decade. The announcement by the Electoral Commission followed days of tension and allegations of violent incidents as well as fraud during the vote.
President Yoweri Museveni has won a 7th term with 71% of the vote, according to the final tally. His main challenger, Bobi Wine, received 24%. The result extends Mr. Museveni's rule to 4 decades, making him one of Africa's longest-serving leaders. But the outcome is fiercely disputed. Opposition supporters are protesting the results, calling the election a sham and alleging widespread rigging and voter intimidation. International observer missions also flagged irregularities, restricted media freedom, and heavy-handed security during the voting process. President Museveni's ruling NRM party also secured a strong majority in parliament, consolidating its control. The election exposed deep generation divides in a country where many young people face unemployment and rising costs, issues that dominated the campaign. For now, the government urges calm while opposition weighs its next steps. Uganda enters a new chapter, but the political divide remains sharply drawn. Michael Baleke, SABC News, Kampala.
Well, let's speak further about the political situation in Uganda. Bring into the conversation Channel Africa correspondent Nixon Katembo joining us here on Unwrap Africa. Nixon, always good to have you on the program. So this was a largely expected outcome, wasn't it, from the election, that President Museveni would remain in power. But what does it mean for Uganda going forward?
I think there is a number of things that we have to look at. One, why Museveni keep winning? And I think this is on the basis of how the demographic layout of the country is, the different program that the government has run, which then speak of the kind of demographic that vote for him versus the demographic that vote for the opposition. If you go back, for example, the rural vote for Uganda and the rural population in general is about 74%. The urban population is about 26%. And much of the developmental program is focus on agriculture, value chain addition in terms of these rural produced products to come to the market in urban areas. And that has kind of set the president apart from the opposition. Whereas the younger population, which is much of the Ugandan's population, and much of which are residing in the cities, do not really connect with the current regime 40 years after Museveni took over power. But there are those disjuncture that you have to look at, how the evolution of Museveni being in power vis-a-vis what he has done while in power and the current Uganda where it is. For example, in terms of economics, Uganda's GDP per capita in 1996 when Museveni came to power, it was about 252 to 53 US dollars per annum. Today, GDP per capita is between $1,000 to $1,300 per family. So you see that developmental change, incremental change. However, this is the very same president who wrote in his Master Seed book that the problem of Africa is leaders staying in power.
Right.
The question is, has he overstayed his stay in power, and why? And why is he keeping winning based on these statistics that we speak of?
And based on that then, Nixon, does it mean that, as the opposition appears to believe, that it's absolutely impossible for Museveni to have won this week's election legitimately?
It depends on which side of the aisle. If you look at the general statistics and you go deeper in the layout of the economic setup in Uganda, you look at the layout of the population, you might find out that there is a disjuncture of what is said in a public platform versus what is happening on the ground. And I think that it differentiates why the opposition is saying what is saying and the government is saying what is saying. To the expense of not feeling like as if I'm defending the government. But if you look at, there is a wide margin that have shown a really developmental aspect in terms of how the country have come from these unstable eras of changing president in the 90s, I mean the 80s, even the 70s under the dictatorship of Idi Amin, to the current dispensation under Museveni. So there is a positive that the government has done, but also there is a negative that the government has done, including the restriction of the internet and so on.
But I wonder, though, Nixon, if President Museveni will ever get to a point where he willingly does not run in an election or leaves power. Is that a likelihood?
The problem with that is that we have seen this across the African continent, that when leaders stay in power, they tend to develop a me-thing that this is about what I've done, and forget that there might be other generational leaders who might come in to continue what they have started. And I think that's the challenge here with the current leadership in Uganda, in a sense that whether the leadership change is going to emerge within the national resistance movement or it is going to emerge outside the national resistance movement in the form of a national unity platform under Bobi Wine. But also, you have again to look at the demographics within Uganda, the social composition in Uganda. And for example, during the Amini years and the Obote years, there was a complete shutdown of the monarchy.
Right.
But Museveni being creative on how he was going to win the people, he brought the monarchy. Uganda was restored, the kingdom of Kitara-Bunyoro was restored, the kingdom of the Toro was restored, and many others. But interestingly, in his own region, in western Uganda, the kingdom of Angola was never restored. And that speaks to how the people relate among themselves within Uganda.
We're out of time, Nixon, but I do want to squeeze in a question about Bobi Wine, the leading opposition leader in Uganda. He now says he's gone into hiding. He does not believe that this outcome from the election this weekend is a credible one. What does his going into hiding, or at least his physical absence in the mainstream, mean now for the opposition and any hope, perhaps, of challenging what it claims were serious irregularities in the electoral process? And how difficult, in fact, has it been for journalists trying to cover the story in the midst of an internet shutdown?
Indeed, it has been a very difficult issue to cover election in Uganda in terms of this internet. But you have to look again at the historical trajectory of election within Uganda. In 2001, when Kizza Besigye ran for the first time against Museveni, he had to escape the country out and came into hiding here in South Africa. So there is a history to that. And I don't think that what is happening to Baby Wine is no different from what has happened previously to others. So democratic processes, unfortunately for the continent, varies from one country to another, from one leader to another, and from population to population. And this is what is happening in Uganda and across the East African region. I think Kenya is the only sort of vibrant democratic processes where winners stay and losers accept and so on. But if you look at the case of, for example, Tanzania, which just happened recently, you look at the case of Rwanda, Victoria Ingabire in prison, you look at the case of Burundi, Agathon Rwasa and many others are facing challenges. So the region really, it's found wanting on that aspect of democratic liberties.
Nixon, always great to have you with us on Unwrap Africa. Nixon Katemba with Channel Africa here at the SABC, helping us to make sense of the political situation in Uganda following elections. And in fact, our question to you this evening is about the situation in Uganda. We're asking about the shutdown of the internet there and what you make of this being used as a tool on the continent, especially going into elections. Let's have a look at your feedback. Got one here that says, we call on people of Uganda to do what is happening in Iran. One other tweet says, Minister Balam's equivocations are not surprising. When asked why internet disruptions happen during elections, pivoted to the problem of young people using TikTok, a tactic known as deflection, changing the subject entirely to avoid discussing an uncomfortable topic. A bit of a longer one here, a response from X that says, today I stand with our brothers and sisters in Uganda. Uganda is bleeding and President Museveni must go. Free Bobi Wine now. Enough is enough. Africa cannot keep normalizing stolen elections, internet blackouts, and the killing of citizens. If you are African, this is your moment. Stand with Uganda. We are Africans and Africa is our responsibility. No one should die because of an election. So those are just some of the posts that responses, in fact, that we received from X. When we come back, we're going to speak to Richard Kamya, the South African coordinator for the opposition National Unity Platform in Uganda. Thanks for staying with Unwrap Africa on SABC News. And this Sunday evening, we continue with our focus on the situation in Uganda, where President Yoweri Museveni has now officially secured a 7th term in power. Yesterday, he was declared the winner of the election with just over 72% of the vote, extending his more than 40 years in power. His main rival, Bobi Wine, who received about 25% of the vote, has rejected the results, calling the process a sham. The election was marred by an internet blackout in the days running up to the vote. A failure of biometric verification machines was also reported. There were also allegations of massive fraud and military intimidation of the opposition. Well, let's take this further now. We're joined by Richard Kamya, the South African coordinator for the opposition National Unity Platform. Richard, good to have you on Unwrap Africa. So the election has come and gone. President Museveni officially declared the winner. Your party disputes this outcome. So what next?
Thank you for having me.
Thembekile,
sorry for that. Thank you for having me, Thembekile, on this show, and for us to be able to expose to the continent what has just happened back home. First of all, we had a very, very sham election We had an election where the military took over the tallying centers. We had an election where polling agents got arrested. We had an election where there was ballot stuffing by the military all over. In darkness, they switched off electricity, they switched off the internet, and they did exactly what we expected. Hence, we called it a protest vote. We completely condemn the fabrication of results by the Electoral Commission, by Mr. Byabakama, who happens to be a former state lawyer. We completely condemn the sham election that happened in our land. Thousands of people turned up to vote. Millions of our people turned up to vote for change. That was the purpose of this election. And we called it a protest vote because we know the regime has always done this that they just did a few days ago. So we knew very well that they would never, ever announce us as winners. So we chose to go for a protest vote. And do you know what they did? They switched off the internet before election day. They went on and switched off electricity during the electoral times. And you had polling centers seated in darkness and the military staffing ballot boxes and doing all they wanted.
But do you have credible evidence to support your claim that ultimately this was a sham election, a stolen election perhaps?
At the home of our deputy president in Central, Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi, we had 10 people shot dead. There was a tallying center there. In Central Uganda, we had Comrade Nyansfred Sentamu, who was a contestant for Kawempe. And his declaration form, a declaration form is the most important evidence at any polling center for results of that specific corner. We had the military pulling DRR forms, declaration forms from him. We had people, in Makinde division, we had the military running away with ballot boxes. And so many other, in Western Uganda, you had the electoral agents ticking ballot papers for the ruling regime, for the ruling government. And this has been this way since the last election in 2021. So it is a repeat of what they have always done. Hence, we called it a protest vote because we expected things like this to happen.
But realistically, is there anything at this stage that you as the opposition can do to challenge this reality?
So we cannot even waste our time of going to court because all our institutions are captured by the regime, by the dictator. What we have asked our people to do is to evoke Article 29 of our Constitution that allows us to protest when the Constitution has been violated. And we have asked all our people to rise up and defend our win because there is no doubt that people stood up, went to vote, protected their vote, but got kicked away and shot dead and oppressed and completely isolated from their will. We cannot allow this to continue because 40 years down the road, what is there more to protect? What is there more to keep?
But if you're calling on people to go out and protest, and you're saying there have already been opposition supporters killed in the country, what does that mean for any sort of civil uprising, if I may phrase it in that way, if that is indeed what you are calling for? And do you actually think it'll make a difference? Won't the government just simply shut it down or crack down on the demonstrators, force them back into their homes?
We definitely expect their brutality, like they have always operated when we try to protest. But the Constitution gives us that right. The Constitution gives us a right to protest when it has been violated. And our people have to exercise that right. Despite the fact that we expect them to be brutal, we expect them to come and kill us like they've done before, but it's the only option we have to a free and just society.
And what about your leader? Bobi Wine has said there was a situation where he and his family were intimidated. He's now, for all intents and purposes, gone into hiding. Is he still in Uganda? And how will he be able to lead any sort of opposition effort or these protests from hiding?
So every time we've had an election, the military has come and encircled the president's home. So this time we knew very well that they'll do the same. Luckily enough, he was able to escape to a hideout where he is now for purposes
in Uganda?
Yes, still. Yes, for purposes of leading these peaceful protests granted by our Constitution. They know very well that if they have him locked up inside the house, he has no way to go. He has no platform to lead anyone into a peaceful protest. So we are very sure that as soon as the internet settles down, like it's been switched on this morning, we are going to mobilize, share the evidence we have. Many videos have come on screen in the past few hours where about staffing was happening, people getting shot dead. So we are waiting for all to get online. Then we are going to start communicating and then hit the road, led by our leader.
Richard Kamya, good to talk to you. spokesperson for the opposition party in Uganda, who's based in South Africa after President Yoweri Museveni won the election this week. They are saying that's simply not a legitimate outcome after Museveni was announced winner with a margin of, well, 72% win, if you will. You're watching Unwrap Africa. We've got much more show for you when we come back. Welcome back. We're almost at the end of our show tonight. But before we go, our producer, Nondandla Mthembu, has been to visit the Oduduwa Eatery. It's in Johannesburg. And she got to get an opportunity, basically, where she learned about the history of King Oduduwa, the founder of the Yoruba people.
We went to the heart of Johannesburg's Marshall Street, where tradition meets flavor. Oduduwa Eatery serves a taste of Yoruba culture on a plate.
This is our beef stew. The beef stew, the spice we use with it, the Indian spice. This one is a fish called kavala. So this one. We almost use the same spice to cook every stew here. This sweet potato is different from a South African sweet potato. This one is from Malawi.
But what's the story behind the name?
Oduduwa is a historical figure, and he was the king of the people of Ile-Ife. He was known as a warrior, a hero, and basically a father of the Yoruba people. So we got the concept because it defines the roots, the heritage, the leadership, and the unity that the Yoruba people had. All African countries individually have their own cultures, but I would love to see African cultures unite to make something extravagant so that the whole world can see that the African continent shares one culture, which is unity.
And on that tasty note, time for the Unwrap Africa team to say goodbye, at least for this week. We're back next Sunday at 8 p.m. right here on SABC News. Bye-bye.